It's my pleasure to introduce Jerry Vernon. And Jerry, I think, without being exaggerating, is an icon on the Western Coast. If you're into history, if you're into aviation, you want to know the background or the who's who, he's the go-to man to ask. And if he doesn't know, he's got a basement full of books, which he can look it up. Most of them he hasn't read. He actually admitted this to me today.
I don't know.
Jerry is the current director, president of the Vancouver chapter of the Canadian Aviation Historical Society. He sits on the editorial board, and you are also on the board of directors with the national board of directors with the Canadian Aviation Historical Society. Jerry has been doing this, I'm talking researching, writing, talking, learning for 43 years. So it's pretty hard to top all of that. He's made immense contributions to history and to the general knowledge of aviation, both in BC and nationally. I've been trying to get him here for a number of years, and in a moment of weakness, he said he'd come. So we're so glad you did, Jerry, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Doug. Doug's going to get even with us. He's going to come over and speak to our Vancouver meeting in October, so that gets us even, I guess.
I'm taking notes.
I am really happy to see so many people here. I wish I could get a fraction of this to our Vancouver chapter meetings. We don't get very good turnout. There's too many things for people to do in Vancouver. They don't come to our meetings. I think there's more people here than we had at the Montreal annual convention this year, where I last gave this paper. And anyway, the Stranraer, we're talking about the Stranraer, and what I gave in Montreal was only half of the story because they had a limited time for speakers, but we've got the evening here, so I'm going to hopefully talk about both the RCAF Stranraers and the Queen Charlotte Airlines and PWA, etc., who flew the Stranraers. And I hope my voice holds out. I've been talking so much to Doug today, I think my voice is starting to fade already. Stranraer, as they called it, was one of the more polite nicknames given to the Supermarine Stranraer flying boat. It was more commonly referred to as the whistling shithouse. I find a way of juggling everything here. Gotta figure these things out. Engineering, gotta figure these things out. Anyway, it's more commonly referred to as the whistling shithouse. I only saw and heard CFBXO fly once, and I was standing by the RCF hangars on the far side of Vancouver Airport. There was a soft whistling sound in the wind in the wires, audible over the engine noise. But it had a toilet in the back of the fuselage, and the wind used to audibly whistle through this fixture, hence the most popular name. A recent UK publication called it the whistling bird cage, but that must be the politically correct version of the name used in Canada. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, the Stranraer was the queen of the fleet in the RCAF, and many well-known RCAF personalities flew them early in their career. Air Vice Marshal John Plant, Major General Fred Carpenter, Air Commodore Dwight Ross, Captain Hook as we called him, Flight Lieutenant David Hornell of VC, and Air Commodore Len Birchall, known as the Savior of Ceylon. They all flew Stranraers. I was fortunate to have a number of RCF friends who had flown the Stranraer in BC and later 422 Squadron Sunderlands overseas. Ken McQuaid later flew the Queen Charlotte Airlines, was probably the world's high-time Stranraer pilot. I may have a word later about Ken if we have some time. It was the RCF's first really large multi-engine aircraft and their first all-metal flying boat, albeit that the metal wings and the control surfaces were still fabric covered. The hull was aluminum, but many stainless steel fittings were used. How did I get into researching the Stranraer? For the last 17 years before I retired from BCTEL, I was a senior engineering manager, responsible among other things for engineering standards. This required regular trips to Ottawa for various national committee meetings. In the beginning, the frequent meeting location was at 1 Nicholas Street, just across the street from the DND Department of History. It was easy to pop into DHIST at the lunch and coffee break to to order up files for review or copy. Later, I also started to visit National Archives, where Carl Vincent was in charge of the old civil aircraft files. Carl introduced me to CAHS and started my long association with our society. In the 1980s, the late Andy Craig started to write a book on the Stranraer. Andy had already written a book on the history of trucking in BC, and he was part of the group that operated CFBXO, the last Stranraer. Andy had interviewed and corresponded with many former RCF Stranraer aircrew and ground crew, as well as Queen Charlotte Airlines and Pacific Western Airlines people. He had a great collection of Stranraer photos and anecdotes, but he had never seen the RCF record cards, never seen the RCF accident cards, courts of inquiry, unit diaries, or the DOT civil aircraft files. So, while the stories were great, they often referred to the wrong airplane, the wrong location, the wrong date, etc. He often got the RCF nomenclature wrong. I worked with Andy to improve his manuscript and clean up the writing, which was pretty rough. The Canadian Museum of Flight started to retype the pages as I modified them, but onto one of those 5 1/4 inch floppy that nobody can read now, and nobody can find it either. So that's typical couple pages after I had treated it. Andy's photo collection was stored in his garage on Gabriel Island, and the roof leaked, ruining all the photos and negatives he had collected from many private sources. I had made a full set of Xerox copies of the photos, but of course Xerox copies are not suitable for anything. The museum did make copy negatives of them all, but we have been unable to find them. When Andy passed away, I was left with a copy of his corrected and partly retyped manuscript. Altogether, I have about a foot-thick pile of Stranraer information. The mission today is to present several hours worth of information in less than an hour, or a little over maybe. What I have decided to do is concentrate on the anecdotes and framework of the story of the Stranraer with RCF, RAF, Queen Charlotte Airlines, Pacific Western Airlines, and Wally Seipel's Aero Transport Corporation in the Bahamas. What I have to say is just the tip of the iceberg. The development of the Stranraer. It may come as a bit of a surprise that the Supermarine Stranraer was designed by Reginald Mitchell, who also designed the beautiful streamlined Spitfire fighter, which first flew less than 2 years later. The Stranraer was the last of a line of large Supermarine biplane flying boats, although they did produce the single-engine Seagull, Walrus, and Sea Otter biplanes through the war. Mitchell had designed the twin-engine Southampton flying boat in 1925. The early Southamptons had a wooden hull, but this was changed to aluminum in the Mark II. These served until the mid-1930s and were superseded in 1932 by the improved Southampton IV, renamed the Scapa, which used a pair of Rolls-Royce Kestrel engines. This is the Scapa with Kestrels, which is like a little Merlin. In 1931, balance 3 different things here. In 1931, the RAF specification was drawn up for a scaled-up Scapa, which resulted in the Southampton V, which was renamed as the Stranraer. The first prototype flew on the 27th of July, 1934. One improvement was an increase in maximum speed from 95 miles an hour on the Southampton to 165 on the Stranraer. I could go that fast in my Mustang, I think. Also, it was 12% larger than the Scapa in dimensions and weight, and it entered RCF service in 1937. That is the prototype Stranraer in England. Only 18 Stranraers were built for the RAF and used by 3 squadrons until withdrawn in 1942. But the RCAF purchased 40 aircraft to be built in Montreal by Canadian Vickers. The Stranraer had a wingspan of 85 feet and a fuselage 54 foot 10 inches long and stood a magnificent 19 foot 9 inches above the keel, or 21 feet 9 inches off the ground but on beaching gear. It was powered by a pair of Bristol Pegasus engines developing 920 horsepower. In later service with QCA and PWA, much more reliable and more powerful Wright cyclones were installed on several surviving aircraft. Mitchell's original choice of the engine was the Rolls-Royce Kestrel, which in retrospect might have been a more trusty choice. The maximum speed was 165 miles an hour, as I've said, with a more leisurely 105 mile per hour cruise, and an endurance of 9 hours, giving a normal range of 1,000 miles or 1,750 miles with underwing external tanks. It was armed with three 303 Lewis machine guns and could carry 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of bombs or depth charges. This is building them at Canadian Vickers. The RCF were looking at a new flying boat in 1936 and selected the Stranraer rather than wait for several more modern aircraft that were still on the drawing board. As Ken Molson noted, this order was the first ever placed in Canada by the RCF for a service aircraft, and the Stranraer became the first service type to be made in Canada since the First World War. The initial order was for 3 aircraft, later increased in stages to 40. They were built and launched at the Canadian Vickers shipyard on the Montreal waterfront and test flown from the river. One of our late CAHS Vancouver chapter members, Eric Drinkwater, was employed as a production engineer for the Stranraers at the Vickers factory. He later joined the RCAF and rose to the rank of squadron leader at number 13 Aeronautical Inspection District of Vancouver. Then he became a chartered accountant or something like that. Anyway, the prototype, RCF 907, made its first flight on the 21st of October 1939, piloted by Herbert Hollick Kenyon, a well-known name in the annals of Canadian aviation. Production was spread out over a period of 4 years, from 1938 to 1941, partly due to delays in the delivery of engines and other equipment from the UK. The last 28 were all delivered in 1941. Early production aircraft used unique 4-bladed wooden propellers, which were basically two large wooden blades notched together. These were later changed to a 3-bladed metal prop. I've seen the museum at Cloverdale's got half a Stranraer propeller, just a half with a notch in it. And I think Cole Harbour, I think they may have part of a propeller up there. I've not seen anybody with a hole, but it was basically 2 wooden propellers notched together in the middle.
One just outside the door.
You got one?
Yeah.
Complete one? Okay, that's good.
No, just a half one.
We have the other half.
You can see there how it's notched together, wooden propeller. Initially, the Stranraer production was assigned to Eastern Air Command, which is where the greatest threat existed until 1941. Later, as newer aircraft came available, Catalina's, Catsos, and Catso A amphibians, all of the older aircraft were shifted to the West Coast, which is a familiar RCF story. You know, West Coast gets stuff last. While this relocation was in progress, Pearl Harbor was attacked, which made their presence in BC greatly appreciated. Eastern Air Command, the first available aircraft were assigned in November 1938 to number 5 BR Squadron at Dartmouth. This is Dartmouth, Shearwater, now called Shearwater. And the type served on this unit until September 1941, including summer detachments in Gaspé and Sydney, when the open water and better weather was available. Stranraers 907, 908, and 909 flew out to sea on the 14th of May, 1939, to meet the Empress of Australia, escorted up the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the river to Quebec City to start the royal visit in Canada. This visit included Halifax a month later, and the Stranraers provided an outboard escort for the Empress of Britain. The commanding officer was Squadron Leader A.D. Ross, as I say, later known as Captain Hook, because he had one hand missing. And their initial equipment was 5 Stranraers, 4 Fairchild 71s, later replaced by Norsemen. Among the pilot establishment was Fred Carpenter and Len Birchall, later very well-known names in the RCF. On the 10th September 1939, the day Canada declared war, Flight Lieutenant Price and crew at RCF 908 carried out the first RCF Stranraer war patrol. They sighted 5 vessels, but no German submarines. In fact, the Stranraers and Eastern Air Command saw little excitement and had no contact with the enemy. Number 117 BR Squadron was formed in August 1941 at Kelly Beach, North Sydney, and flew Stranraers there for about a month. Very little of note happened at 117 in the short period they flew Stranraers. During the winters during the winters, it was not possible to ferry Stranraers from the Montreal factory to the Maritimes. So several were shipped dismantled by rail and erected at Dartmouth. This appears to have happened in the winters of 1938-39 and 1940-41. There were no deliveries at all between the fall of 1939 and the fall of 1940. There was a good sequence of photos of RCF 923 being unloaded from a boxcar on the 28th of February 1941 and erected on site by Canadian Vickers personnel. RCF 920, which became CFBXO, had arrived by rail on the 20th of December 1940 and was ready for testing on the 19th of January 1941, followed by 921, 922, and 923. Each one took about a month to assemble, and then Vickers sent out a pilot to fly it. Now there's a huge sequence of photos. I've only shown about a third of them here, but the RCF took a whole sequence of photos of this thing being unloaded from the train and trundled into a hangar and eventually assembled. Put on the beaching gear so they could move it around a bit. Put it on the upper wing. The period of Stranraer service in the Eastern Air Command was not marked by a lot of action or anecdotes. However, on September the 17th, 1939, RCF 911 was lost as a result of a forced landing in the Cabot Strait. They had been searching for a convoy out beyond Sable Island, were running low on fuel, and had an engine failure while trying to find Sydney in heavy fog. Although unable to make radio contact with base, they did send a distress message via the 2 carrier pigeons on board. That was a standard way, before fiber optics or anything, they had carrier pigeons. In order to stabilize the aircraft in rough seas, the crew stripped the fabric from the lower wing. After being adrift for 22 hours, they were picked up the next day by the Swedish tanker Pollux, and the following day a tug put a line on the aircraft, but it sank while under tow. This was the first RCF Stranraer loss. You can see there the wing, all the fabric's gone off the lower wing, and they're all standing out on it to keep it stabilized, because the water would swoosh up through the open wing then. But unfortunately it sank while under tow. This was really high-tech telecommunications, 1939 vintage. One carrier pigeon disappeared, so the other was found by a farmer who disregarded it for the first day, but on the second day he noted it had an attached message cylinder on its leg. By the time he phoned the RCMP with a distress message, the crew had been found and rescued. And on March the 6th, 1941, 910 ran aground during a night landing in Eastern Passage, which is at Dartmouth. It filled with water and sank to the point where the entire fuselage and lower wings were submerged at high tide. However, it was shallow water, close to shore, so it was recovered, repaired, and flew again for many years, entering post-war service in the Caribbean as CF-BYE. They were a pretty tough old bird. Now we talk about the Western migration. The first Stranraer, RCF 912, in BC, in July 1939, was assigned to number 4 BR Squadron at Jericho Beach, and eventually all survivors and new production headed for the West Coast. It was, of course, necessary to plan a ferry route with acceptable stages, open water, and refueling access available, which was not possible for several months of the year. That's Jericho Beach. It was not possible for several months of the year during freeze-up. You can imagine coming across Canada from December to about March. Couldn't do it. Typical open water staging locations were Moosehead Lake in Maine, Rockcliffe, Sudbury, Kapuskasing, Sioux Lookout, Ribby Lake in Ontario, the Pas, Lac de Bonnet in Manitoba, Regina Beach, that's Regina Beach, there is a beach at Regina, Cooking Lake, Alberta, Brooks, Alberta, and Waterton Lakes, and various BC lakes at Red Pass Junction, Red Pass Junction, Nelson, Penticton, the Soyuz, Seminar, anywhere there was water. They put them down and refueled, etc. And they eventually got them out here, but that was when they had water. The typical flying time recorded from Montreal to Iqaluit was 28 hours, 40 minutes, following the TCA route. One aircraft, RCF 946, departed from the lake at Penticton on the 4th of November 1941, but never arrived at Jericho Beach. It had been delayed for 12 days at Penticton to repair damage from striking a wharf on the 23rd of October. The pilot, Sergeant Pilot Jack Fenton Bliss, one of two Bliss brothers flying Stranraer. Can this go on? You don't hear this anymore, do you? No. Speak up. Okay. Let's move your batteries run.
Technician.
No, okay. I'll speak up, I guess. Sergeant Pilot Jack Bliss, one of two Bliss brothers flying the Stranraer. The other four on board were not located until 1947. Crashed on top of a mountain between Squamish and the head of Indian Arm, about 20 miles north of Vancouver. They were only 50 feet below the summit. This came back to life. Maybe I touched the wrong thing. They were only 50 feet below the summit. They were in contact by radio and reported they were over land in a heavy snowstorm, running short of fuel. They apparently lost their orientation on the radio ranges and wandered off into the mountains, as other planes have done. The original captain of 946, Flying Officer Colburn, had a lucky escape. He had fallen ill with appendicitis at Regina on the 18th of October, was taken to hospital and replaced by Sergeant Bliss, who had been the second pilot on another aircraft. For those who don't know, they had sergeant pilots in those, sergeants and warrant officers were pilots in the Air Force in those days, and through the war. After the rivers and lakes started to freeze in late 1941, it became necessary to use a much longer flying boat-friendly route, which took them down into the U.S. as far south as Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, through the mountains to California, then heading up the coast to Jericho Beach. They were flying in Framboya. The plan was to do this in 3-plane formations, but it didn't always go according to plan. On the last week of September, 3 flights left Dartmouth for the west coast. RCF 919 and 929 were left behind until parts could be flown back for Western Air Command. An incident happened to 919 on the 15th of October 1941 on the first leg from Dartmouth to Montreal, while taking the shortcut route across the state of Maine in the face of a strong west wind. After 5 hours of struggling into the wind and making little headway, the aircraft ran out of fuel and had to force land on a lake at Jackman, Maine, not very far from Halifax to Montreal. 5 hours in the wind. On the 16th, 922 joined 919 at Jackman due to bad weather. On the 24th, RCF 910 suffered elevator and hull damage in a forced landing at Moosehead Lake in Greenville, Maine, and the repair party had to drive there from Dartmouth due to continued bad flying weather. One Formation 3, One Formation 3 headed west from Rockcliffe, stopping at NAS Naval Air Station, Norfolk, Virginia, before heading across the U.S. and arriving at the Trimble Island Naval Air Station in Long Beach, California. They then proceeded up the coast to Jericho Beach. They had departed from the Naval Air Station Norfolk on the 7th of December 41 and arrived at Long Beach on the 15th of December 1941, which was a time of great turmoil in the U.S. due to the Pearl Harbor attack. Ian MacDonald, who was a CAHS member in Ottawa, some may know him, as a flown postal cover that was mailed back to a naval officer at Norfolk after the aircraft arrived in California. So this is a postal cover he mailed from Long Beach back to Norfolk, Virginia. And I say, they left the East Coast U.S. on the 7th of November, 1941, which is a Pearl Harbor Day. Eh? So there was a lot of tension going on in the States by that. Veteran photographer William Larkins took photos of one group of Stranraers, including RCF 952, after arrival on the Pacific Coast on November 1941. This is at Long Beach, I believe, or San Francisco. I'm not sure which. There's 2 Stranraers. One's faded away in the background. A later formation was not so fortunate, as one of the aircraft lost an engine over Illinois, was damaged in a forced landing, and had a prolonged stay in the Chicago area while hull repairs were carried out. This saga was described in great detail by the pilot, Flight Lieutenant, later Wing Commander, Peter Ver. I will summarize his long story. It goes on for pages and pages. I'll summarize it. Stranraers 908, 953, and 954, that's 954, departed from Rockcliffe on the 28th of November 41, bound for Jericho Beach via the southern U.S. route. After overnighting at Selfridge Naval Air Station on Lake St. Clair, they then flew to Chicago, where they were stuck for a week due to fog. RCF 953 lost the starboard engine an hour west of Chicago on the 6th of December. They turned around and tried to make it back to a river they had passed half an hour earlier. They had been cruising at 5,000 feet. Internal fuel was jettisoned, but it was not possible to dump fuel in the two underwing overload tanks. They were still losing 100 feet per minute. To further reduce weight, the crew threw out the dinghy, toolboxes, etc. The pilot said he luckily looked back and caught them just as they were about to throw out his luggage. These items rained down onto the countryside, and some were recovered later, including some bent bomb racks, the rigger's toolbox, and the dinghy, which was found on display at a local tavern. The port engine was at full throttle, and the crew had full left rudder on, as the Stranraer did not have rudder trim tabs. They were following a highway and were soon dodging around huge piles of coal mining slag. They were following a highway and by the time they reached the Kankakee River, they were down to 500 feet. Landing on the shallow river, they tore out the bottom of the hull. There was only 1.5 feet of water in that part of the river, so they didn't get their feet wet. However, they had a bit of a problem getting ashore as they had jettisoned their dinghy. The Illinois State Police helped them retrace the last portion of their flight, visiting various farmhouses to locate items and ensure that nobody had been clobbered by falling objects. They even arranged the crew accommodation and meals at a farm near the grounded aircraft. They were stuck there for several months on what they call it TD now. They were stuck boarding at some farmhouse until the airplane was fixed. While this was ongoing, news came through that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed. Meanwhile, 908-954 returned to Chicago, arranged contact with the U.S. military, and then carried on their trip west. They flew via Oklahoma City, Fort Worth, Elephant Butte, New Mexico, San Diego, and Oakland, arriving at Jericho on the 11th of December. A set of beaching gear was sent in, installed on the 11th of December, and 953 was towed ashore with the help of the U.S. Corps of Engineers at Joliet, Illinois. Initially, personnel from the nearby Glenview Naval Air Station had inspected the damage and volunteered to repair it. However, it made more sense to bring people down from Canadian Vickers to measure up the replacement hull plates needed. But this took until nearly New Year's Eve. Meanwhile, the fitters determined that the engine failure had been caused by frozen breaker points on both magnetos, as well as a breakdown of the entire ignition wiring harnesses. Rewiring the engine took until the 27th of January, but there was no rush as the hull plates had to be replaced. Replacement hull parts arrived on the 3rd of January, and the U.S. Navy personnel started repair work in frigid below zero Fahrenheit conditions. A temporary heated tarpaulin was built around the damaged hull. It took some time to repair the damage, but the aircraft was ready to go by the 24th of January. By this time, the river was frozen, but a deeper section was found, and hand ice saws were used to cut a 2,000 by 150 foot channel. The Stranraer was dragged over by a Caterpillar crane, and the takeoff was planned with minimum fuel, only the pilot and flight engineer on board. On the 29th of January, with a good headwind, the tail was tied down, the engines were opened wide, the rope was cut, and they were off at about 1,000 feet. They landed at Joliet, and everything was loaded back on board. There was a further weather delay at Joliet, but on the 8th of February, the flight continued south and west to Oklahoma City, Fort Worth, and the Caballo Reservoir on the Rio Grande River. They had to go that far south to find open water. It was now the 13th of February. The reservoir is at 3,300 feet elevation, and there was a problem getting the loaded flying boat off the water, even with the crew running back and forth, trying to get it up on the step. Eventually, a brisk wind came up and they got away on the last lake of San Pedro, Long Beach. But they ran into snow and towering ceiling while looking for a route through the mountains, so they returned to Phoenix and landed on the nearby Roosevelt Reservoir. Several trucks full of soldiers were seen on the shore road. They were firing off their rifles at this strange aircraft that had arrived unannounced at the dam. They were guarding against possible Japanese attack. I suppose the Stranraer looked sort of like a Japanese Mavis flying boat. Their aim was bad and no damage was done. Arrangements were made to bring in fuel from Phoenix. The next day they were able to continue on to San Pedro, up to Alameda in San Francisco on the 16th. Another overnight stay on the Oregon coast, courtesy of the U.S. Coast Guard, and they worked their way up to Vancouver, finally arriving at Jericho Beach on February the 18th, 82 days after leaving Rockcliffe. Western Air Command, now we're getting past the Western Air Command. In all, 7 squadrons plus the flying boat OTU operated Stranraers out of the various West Coast flying boat stations. At several of the stations, they replaced the single-engine Blackburn Sharks. They had Blackburn Sharks here too. Flying boat stations in the Western Air Command were located at Jericho Beach, Ucluelet, Bella Bella, Cold Harbor, Alfred Bay, Prince Rupert, and Patricia Bay. Number 4 BR Squadron was established at Jericho Beach, at the historic Jericho Beach site in Vancouver, later moved to a new station at Ucluelet on the west coast of Vancouver Island. The wartime hangar is still there. This is Jericho. This is a wartime picture of Jericho Beach. They took over, there's a golf course. They took over a golf course, the Jericho Beach golf course. That's a more modern picture of Jericho Beach. The hangars are gone. The ramp is gone now. The beach has been restored to a sandy beach that was originally back before the Air Force moved in. They moved into Ucluelet. Now that hangar is still there too. The wartime hangar is still there, now used as a fish processing plant. But the squadron later moved ashore to the newly built Tofino airfield when the amphibious Canso A's arrived. That's the Montagnais crash boat. It's at the Ucluelet Wharf. Lost track of where we are now. Anyway, Number 6 BR Squadron started at Jericho Beach, but later moved to a remote news station at Alfred Bay in the Queen Charlotte Islands. This was the most isolated of the West Coast flying boat stations. That's Alfred Bay. Not as much there now, but at that time they had a little building on the left is the men's canteen. The bigger building in the middle is the officers' mess, quarters, and canteen. And there was 1 or 2 hangars. And I think there's very little at Alfred Bay now. Well, yeah, you can see again, that's the 2 hangars at Alfred Bay, and the messes and quarters were just this side of it. Number 7 BR Squadron operated out of Seal Cove in the city of Prince Rupert during the period they flew the Stranraer. This is now the main float plane based in the area. The hangar and ramp was up that little peninsula on the still is, and that's to say, this is the float plane base now for Prince Rupert. And Prince Rupert had a crane, and Jericho had a crane like that too, I believe. You may have had one here as well.
We did.
Yeah, you did. That was standard, I guess. Number 9 BR Squadron was at the original Indian village of Bella Bella on the Inside Passage. This is now known as Old Bella Bella or Shearwater, which was a large marine operation. Their first mission was flown by Flight Squadron Leader Fred Carpenter, later Chief of Air Staff, in Stranraer 949 on the 9th of December 1941, just 2 days after Pearl Harbor attack. This is the wartime pictures of Bella Bella. They also had this, I mentioned this part of this, they had what they called the scow. The Air Force had this barge, which was sort of a floating maintenance shop, and it was called the scow, but it also had a number. But I think they only had one of them here on the West Coast, but it sort of was used for servicing when they didn't have land facilities. A Stranraer model was mounted there in recent years by the current operators of the facility. I was supposed to, they had a fancy opening house and everything, and they built this beautiful Stranraer model up at Shearwater Marine. And I was supposed to go up for it, and they forgot to phone me. And they phoned me about 8 o'clock in the morning and said, "The plane's leaving in 5 minutes, why aren't you here?" And I said, "Well, nobody phoned me to say it was confirmed." So they had a chartered aircraft that said going up, and I didn't get on it. But I'd like to see that model. It looks like a beauty. Now 13 OT, that looks familiar, right? 13 OT Squadron was a seaplane and bomber reconnaissance training school, and their flying boat operations were at Sea Island, Vancouver Airport, and later Patricia Bay. They did no operational flying. Their CO during most of the Stranraer period was Squadron Louis Lee, another well-known name. The function was later taken over by number 3 OTU. Here's the old seaplane ramp as it was then. I mean, it's no, it's not then, it's now. It's like, I guess George Maud worked with a seaplane, the Marine section here at Pat Bay during the war. This is the ramp over the other side somewhere, in front of the hangars, Air Force hangars, down by the seaplane base, with a shark in the foreground and several Stranraers. Number 120 BR Squadron was established at Cole Harbour, near the northern tip of Vancouver Island. Their first wartime patrol was flown by Stranraer 950 on the 11th of December 1941. Post-war, this RCF station became a commercial whaling station. The hangar is still there. I was up there in, when was it? In May. I flew up, 3 of us flew up to Cole Harbour. We flew up to Port McNeill in a push-pill Cessna that one of our chapter members has, and we got picked up and taken out to Cole Harbour. And there's an old codger up there, has a flying operation of about 4 or 5 beavers, and he flies out of this hangar. There's the hangar, and the lean-to on the side of the hangar, he's got a 4-room museum. That's what we went to see. He's got one room full of all kinds of Cole Harbour aircraft memorabilia. He's got one room is kind of a library and a reading room and more memorabilia and paintings. He's got one room full of old chainsaws. He's got one room full of old telephones, the old manual telephones. But it's a great little museum, and I say, he's welcome to anybody to go up there. His name is Joel. Yeah, Joel. Okay. Number 166 Squadron at Sea Island was a spin-off of the communications flight of number 122 Composite Squadron. It flew a variety of land planes and seaplanes, including Stranraers, transporting Western Air Command personnel. Number 3 OTU was the flying boat operational training unit located at Patricia Bay near Victoria. They flew as many as a dozen Stranraers and eventually moved on to Cansos and Catalinas. Although it has never been widely publicized, apart from the famous shelling of the Estevan Point Lighthouse, there was considerable Japanese submarine activity off the BC coast early in the war. On the 9th of June 1941, the SS Coast Trader was torpedoed and sunk. And Stranraer 938 located 2 lifeboats with 22 survivors and directed the RCN Corvette to pick them up. On the 19th of June 1942, the SS Fort Camosun was torpedoed off the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, but remained barely afloat due to a full cargo of lumber. Stranraer 914 provided cover to RCN vessels that towed the freighter to Victoria. I've seen a picture of that. It was right down the deck cargo, all loaded with lumber. And it was right down to it was in the water right up to the deck level. They towed it in. There were frequent submarine sightings, reports from civilians almost daily, which could have been whales, deadheads, or too much John Barleycorn on the reservation. No verified submarines were actually seen or attacked. During West Coast RCF operations, there were 7 major accidents involving fatalities and destroyed Stranraers, and several others were written off as well due to non-fatal accident damage. RCF 916 from 3 OTU crashed on the 18th of July, 43 in Stewart Channel near Crofton on Vancouver Island, with 2 fatalities. The aircraft had landed nose low on glassy water, flipped over and sank. One survivor was the wireless operator, Joe Chesney, who became a local radio personality post-war. He was on CKNW for years, and he owned radio station CJJC in Langley. He was the one survivor. RCF 927 crashed on the 27th of May, 41, while landing in high waves with an engine on fire at the mouth of Nanus Bay, north of Nanaimo. All 8 on board perished. RCF 928 from Ucluelet crashed and burned on the 30th of December, 41, in the bush near Long Beach, Pacific Rim National Park, just half a mile from the RCF station. They suffered an engine failure at low altitude just after takeoff, were unable to reach open water. The 4 up front were killed, and the 4 survived in the back. RCF 935 crashed on the 14th of February. That's not on the Skidegate Channel near the Alfred Bay Station. There were two relatively inexperienced pilots on board, and a bad landing was followed by an increasingly severe series of bounces and a water loop. Both port wings came off, and the aircraft sank almost immediately. As it sank, the depth charges exploded, and all 6 crew members were killed. Only one body was ever found. As noted earlier, RCF 946 went missing in a snowstorm on the 4th of November 41 on the final leg of a ferry flight from eastern Canada to Jericho Beach, located in 1947 on a mountaintop near Vancouver with 5 fatalities. RCF 951 from Cole Harbour was lost at sea on the 23rd of August 1942 while on a patrol over the Pacific Ocean. They had to force land due to an engine failure. It's a common thing, engine failure, it keeps happening. The Pegasus was not a great engine. Had an engine failure and were later seen by another Stranraer sitting on the water 250 miles offshore. This other aircraft had to return to base due to bad weather and with an engine problem of its own. When further aircraft and the Ucluelet-based high-speed rescue launch Montaigne reached the area, no trace whatsoever could be found. A dozen Stranraers from 4 different stations searched for a week. There were reports that a Japanese submarine had been seen on the surface in the area, which led to some speculation. Nothing positive, 8 missing. RCF 954 crashed on 20th of September 43 while on a transport flight into the U.S. base at Annette Island, Alaska, with mail and several 135 Fighter Squadron Kitty Hawk pilots as passengers. 3 were killed, 1 missing, 10 injured. In addition, there were several other non-fatal accidents, write-offs, and numerous accidents that required a trip to the repair depot, from causes such as storm damage, engine fires, hitting a bombing range target, flying through trees in the fog. I was here somewhere, close to here. And even a mid-air between 2 Stranraers while doing lazy air gunner training exercise. Even having both wings on one side destroyed by fire could be survived thanks to the factory spares. RCF 908, 918, 929, 931, 933, 937, and 938 were scrapped, while 947 and 952 went that route on paper, but were actually sold to Seipel Aircraft for spares. RCF 922 survived an engine fire in flight, but later caught fire, burned to the waterline, and sank at Alfred Bay during a night refueling on New Year's Eve, 31st of December 1941. While the refueling crew were draining water from the tanks, fuel was ignited by a carelessly placed kerosene mooring lamp they were using for lighting. So one guy was draining the tanks, the other guy was kind of lantern up trying to show him how it burned the waterline and sank. RCF 932 had an engine fire on takeoff at Pat Bay on the 2nd of November. The aircraft was put back down and the crew jumped into the water. An Air Force, that's 932. An Air Force Cross was awarded to the pilot and an Air Force Medal to an LAC crewman for bravery in fighting the fire, saving the aircraft, and assisting other crew members to evacuate. Both the upper and lower port wings were destroyed by the fire, but it was sent to the repair depot at Jericho Beach and returned to service. Stranraer 915, that's the one that still exists back in Nova Scotia, or part of it, BYJ. Stranraer 915 struck the mast of the RCF vessel. It's the wrong place. Okay, sorry. Struck the mast of the RCF marine craft Jaeger while doing a bit of unauthorized low flying through Gunboat Passage near Bella Bella. Both survived. 915 became QCA's CFBYJ, and the Jaeger is now a yacht. That's the Jaeger during the war, and the Jaeger as it is today, somewhere up the coast, is a small yacht. A similar fire caused by pumping the throttle at engine start burned all the fabric off both wings of 933 at Pat Bay, and it was written off. Damaged Stranraers are put on board a barge or an RCF supply and salvage vessel such as the M206 Haida and hauled off to number 3 repair depot at Jericho Beach or to the CPA repair overhaul plant in New Westminster. CPA had a plant at Queensboro, and the building is still there. It's being used for all kinds of containers and little companies. It's a wartime. They built it way up in New Westminster, so in case Vancouver was bombed, seaplanes would land there, other airplanes, Liberators, things were taken up by barge. But they did all the metal aircraft, and the overall outfit at Sea Island, Coates aircraft, did fabric things like Tiger Moths and Hurricanes and Norsemen. But anyway, I was surprised, I was up there recently, I'm surprised the building is still there, it's a great big plant, near the Annacis Island Bridge. Okay, of the 40 RCF Stranraers, only 4 of them did not have one or more substantial accidents in their file. By the fall of 1944, RCF 920 had already been sold as BXO, and there were 12 intact and about 7 hulks left, which were all sold to Seipel Aircraft Limited. The OTU is here. Number 3 OTU at Patricia Bay was formed in November 1942, taking over the flying boat training operations of number 13 OT Squadron. Initial establishment was 10 Stranraers and a Cessna crane. By the spring of 1944, the unit was down to 4 Stranraers, but had 20 Cansos. By the end of May, all Stranraers were gone. The OTU was a major Stranraer user, converting aircrew to seaplane operations. As might be expected, a number of the Stranraer incidents involved training flights. But there were only one fatal crash, 916, which I've mentioned. I had a number of RCF friends, all gone now, who trained here on Stranraers and then flew Sunderland's operationally with number 922 Squadron. Now that is the end of the RCF half of the story. We suggest that we take our break about now, and then I'll come back, and the shorter half is the airlines that flew them. Okay?
Okay, so 5 minutes there.
Anyway, okay, so that was the end of the RCF story, and now we move on. CFBXO, this is the last Stranraer. Okay, the Labrador Mining and Exploration Company. The LME, they call themselves, I guess that was their stock market. The Labrador Mining and Exploration Company and Hollinger were 2 mining companies, later merged, which began exploring the Labrador iron ore deposits in the mid-1930s. And they were granted large mining concessions. LME were also able to buy Stranraer 920 in May of 1944, which they registered as CFBXO. They also acquired a fleet freighter on float, BXP, terribly ugly airplane if you've ever seen one, a fleet Finch, CFBXJ, from the RCF at the same time. So by the spring of 1944, the Stranraers had been replaced basically by Cansos, and they let Labrador Mining have one. You know, there was a lot of restrictions on civilian registered aircraft during the war, but they let them have one because they were mining the iron ore deposits, which of course were of strategic use. So anyway, the Stranraer was based at Rapide Lake, was flown and maintained under contract by Canadian Pacific Airlines. It was used to ferry personnel and freight from 7 islands, St. Hills, to various lakes in the exploration area. It suffered one major accident where the cylinder head was blown through the cowling, a common occurrence with the Pegasus engines, resulting in a forced landing and tearing 27 holes in the hull on the rocky shoreline, which were repaired on site by Babe Woollett, the CP airline crew. Now, Babe Woollett was an old bush pilot codger who ended up as the vice president of CP Air, but he was at that time running some of their bush operations. He wrote a book called Have a Banana, if you've seen it. It's a big, thick book. I think he'd been a World War I pilot. He was quite a character. Anyway, he talks about this in his book, all these 27 holes in the engine. In 1947, the Stranraer was sold to Queen Charlotte Airlines, while the fleet freighter met a sticky end and is now in storage at the National Aviation Museum. Seipel Aircraft. In the fall of 1944, Wally Seipel of Seipel Aircraft bought 20 Stranraers and 72 Bristol Pegasus engines from War Assets Corporation for $160,000. He later bought one more aircraft, RCF 949. Not all of them were airworthy, but civil registrations CFBYA to BYM were assigned to the first 13. The main intention was to use them for freight and passenger service in the Caribbean, British West Indies. 8 aircraft were ferried down to Florida, and another 4 were later sold to Queen Charlotte Airlines. The remaining aircraft were either damaged or incomplete hulks sitting Pat Bay, and number 3 repaired to put Jericho Beach. They were all scrapped following 2 hangar fires at Pat Bay and a destructive windstorm hit Jericho Beach on the 2nd of February 1947. Wally Seipel arranged for a number of RCAF ground and air crew personnel to obtain an early release from the RCAF to work on his operation. Al Lilly, later well known for his test flying at Canadair, was hired as general manager. Some of you may recognize Al Lilly's name. He's a Hall of Fame member. He was a test pilot for the Sabres at Canadair and all that. But anyway, he got out of the Air Force, became the general manager of Seipel Aircraft. Bill McPhee, father of Vancouver chapter member Alex McPhee, was also hired, and he took along his camera. So the Aero Transport Corporation. Back to this again. 8 or 9 Stranraers were ferried from Jericho Beach across the U.S. to Tampa, Florida, and were assigned NR, NX, or British West Indies VP civil registrations. This was done during wartime conditions, and there was some consternation in the U.S. about these strange apparitions in the sky, which were ferried via Seattle, Lake Mead, and across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, etc., wherever there was open water. And I think they may have ferried them without ferry permits or getting American military permission. So this is 44 they're ferrying these things cross-country to the Caribbean. The files in Ottawa indicate there was an informal agreement in the mid-1940s between Canada and the U.S. not to sell military surplus aircraft privately in each other's country. What Seipel had done was in violation of this agreement, but all C.D. Howe could do by that time was to issue an apology. Ottawa was apologizing in those days. The plan was to operate services between the U.S., Haiti, Cuba, and Colombia. I have a poster covering the 25th anniversary of the first air mile service to the Cayman Islands, flown by a Stranraer on 23rd November 1946. It names the operators as Jamaica Air Transport Limited. Captain King Parker, Jr. had flown the 343 miles from Kingston, Jamaica to Georgetown, Grand Cayman in 3 hours and 20 minutes to inaugurate a weekly service between the 2 locations. At that time, the Cayman Islands were a dependency of Jamaica. And I don't really know how long this lasted. Apparently, Jamaica Air Transport took over some of the Stranraers that had belonged to Aero Transport Corporation. He was one of the guys, Vic Jensen. He was one of the guys who had been recruited here, got out of the Air Force and went down. And when I talked to him some years ago now, he was still living. He ended up marrying and settling down, living in Florida. Many years ago, I had a good conversation with Vic Jensen, who lived in Florida. He was one of the Canadians recruited to go down to the Stranraers. He told me that one of the Stranraers, identity not known, blew an engine in Colombia, was abandoned there. It was not possible to go down and do an engine change on site, and certainly not possible to ferry it out on one engine. He was probably sitting on some lake, and you're probably lucky to get out of there anyway, let alone on one engine, so that they couldn't change. Many years ago, apart from the flights mentioned, it does not appear that much was done with the ATC Stranraers, and several of them remain sitting in Tampa. In mid-February of 1949, Wally Seipel, his wife, and his 5 children were all killed in the crash of his beach bonanza on a snow-covered farmer's field near Dunvegan, Ontario. It was a dark evening, and there was some speculation that icing was the cause. Among his various aviation businesses, I understand that Seipel was also a dealer or distributor in Canada for the new Beechcraft Bonanza. He was also involved with Don McVicker, who some of you have read Don McVicker's books. He was a dealer in aircraft, and I say the whole thing fell apart. This seems to have spelled out the end of the Aero Transport Corporation. The 4 Stranraers that were sitting in Tampa were abandoned and were eventually seized for unpaid tie-down fees by the Hillsborough Aviation Authority. They were sold at Jacobson's Iron, Scrap, and Rags. Photos show them sitting in Jacobson's scrapyard in Tampa, awaiting scrapping. Apart from the reference to one aircraft being abandoned in South America, nothing is known of the fate of the other 3 or 4 that carried West Indies registrations. Queen Charlotte Airlines comes up. As detailed at length in his book, The Accidental Airline, Queen Charlotte Airlines President Jim Pillsbury purchased 4 Stranraers from Cycle: BYI, BYJ, BYL, and BYM, and later also purchased BXO from the Labrador Mining and Exploration Company. After accidentally getting into the airline business, I'm sure you've all read Jim's book, or many of you have read The Accidental Airline. I've heard him give the talk a couple of times. Great guy. After accidentally getting into the airline business after purchasing a Waco on floats during the war to service marine radios up and down the BC coast, by the late 1940s, the demand for passenger air service had grown to the point where larger aircraft were needed. Cycle offered the Stranraers at $25,000 apiece. Don't forget, he bought 20 of them for $160,000. He offered them for $25,000 apiece, and Pillsbury initially ordered 2, BYI and BYL. When he presented this plan to the local DOT superintendent, Carter Guest, he was told, "Over my dead body, would he allow Stranraers to be used for passenger service in his region?" And if you knew of Carter Guest, he ran the DOT in the Pacific region like it was his own personal kingdom. Cycle said this wasn't a problem, just bring them down to Quebec and he would get them certified. BYI was ferried to Quebec and 20 passenger seats were fitted. The aircraft was certified by a female aeronautical engineer whose father just happened to be the director of aircraft inspection at DOT headquarters. Much to the dismay of Carter Guest, QCA then had a CLA for passenger transport in Stranraers. While in Quebec, CFBYI had the bottom of the hull torn out twice when it hit the bottom and the rocks in shallow water. And it happened later on, in Jim's book, again at one of the upshore logging camps. The same aircraft got the hull torn out again on. Anyway, QCA ran a daily scheduled Stranraer service from Vancouver with stops at Paul River, Minstrel Island, Alert Bay, and Sullivan Bay, with other on-demand stops as needed, usually about 14 legs over 8 or 9 flying hours. The one-way fare to Sullivan Bay at the end of the line was $31, or 16 cents a pound for freight. There's their price schedule. Vancouver to Sullivan Bay was $31. Minstrel Island was $27. And the highest one was $31 was the highest fare. A large QCA map shows 100 circled numbers, all these little numbers on the map. You can't see them too well, but I've colored 2 of them. I've colored Allison Sound, Belize Inlet, which is where BYI crashed, and the other little dot there is Sullivan Bay. I'm familiar with Sullivan Bay? It's sort of a floating logging camp. I've only been in there once.
It's actually a tourist trap.
Hmm?
It's actually a tourist place now.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a floating logging camp then. And I've been in there once by helicopter and one of our famous marine surveys, Bill. Okay, so they would land, so each one of those little numbers you can't see is a logging camp, an Indian village or whatever, where they would land on demand. The flag stop, you might call it. There's Sullivan Bay. This is the famous picture of 2 Stranraers at Sullivan Bay. It's BXO and BYI, I think it is, or J, I can't tell. A scary but humorous incident involved a captain unintentionally taking off while a crewman was still out on the wings, desperately clinging to a wing strut. The crewman had been concerned about an oil leak in the starboard engine, so he went out with a wrench to tighten the line at one of the flag stops. A passenger closed the door to keep out the rain, and the pilot assumed the crewman had come back on board. So he fired up both engines and took off. Fortunately, it was a short flight to the next camp. No names were mentioned in this story. QCA Captain Bill Peters wrote off 2 of the QCA Stranraers, BYI and BYJ. I had spoken to old Bill not long before he died, and he told me some good stories. That's BYJ. Oh, it's BYI. It's I. CFBYI was called the Haida Queen. It suffered an engine failure while southbound from Sullivan Bay to Vancouver. A Norseman was sent up to Forward Harbor to bring the passengers out in mail to Vancouver while temporary repairs are made. The QCA crews always carried a couple of spare cylinders under the pilot's seat, as this was a regular occurrence with the Pegasus engine. A replacement cylinder was installed and the crew headed for Vancouver. So it was easy to do. You just unscrewed the whole head and took it off and put it in one on. On the 28th of January 48, skip. On the 28th of January 48, but an engine fire soon broke out. Captain Bill Peters and Wally Britland put the aircraft down on the water, and an attempt was made to put out the fire. It was unsuccessful. The crew were rescued by a nearby fish boat, and BYI burned to the waterline and sank. This is BYI up at a Little Lake, at the end of Little Lake. There's BYI again, the Haida Queen. I think that looks like Inky Klatt. Everyone knew Inky Klatt. He was a member of our museum, and he was a goose etc. mechanic for years for Macmillan Bodell. I'm sure that's Inky up there. He was with the Stranraers in those days, QCA. And BYJ, next one. BYJ was initially sold by Cycle to Morris Summit Gold Mines in BC, but it was not taken up. 6 days later, on the 17th of September, 46, it was sold to Queen Child Airlines as the Nootka Queen, as a replacement for the ill-fated Skeena Queen. In the spring of 1949, it was re-engined with Wright Cyclone GR 1820 205A engines. It was written off in a crash on Christmas Eve, 1949, while landing at Oscar Johnson's camp on Belize Inlet. Captain Bill Peters told me that he had stubbed his toe, meaning he had touched down with the nose too low and the aircraft had flipped. The nose broke off ahead of the pilot's seats and is still at the bottom of the inlet. There's BYJ. Years later. 2 passengers were killed when trapped in the cabin by a refrigerator and other loose freight. The wreckage was raised in the spring of 1950 to recover the 2 bodies and the specially built Wright engine mounts. They wanted those. The wreckage was hauled up on the shore and laid there on the beach until 1983, when Bill Thompson, one of the founders of the Canadian Museum of Flight, salvaged it and barged it to the museum. Early in 1983, several of my engineers were doing a marine radio telephone survey in the area and took some photos of the wreckage for me. So it lay there on the beach from 1949 till 83, with the tide going up and down. It was full of particles, and it smelled something awful. They brought it down and deposited it at the museum at Crescent Beach. And I said, the nose is still at the bottom of the bay somewhere. But basically, it's all there from about the cockpit windows back. When I had a good look at it. There it is at the museum. We kept it well away from most things. But I said, when you look through all the wreckage, I found traces of the CFBYL, the Skeena Queen, unlike the other QCA Stranraers, was painted black with yellow flying surfaces. It had arrived at Prince Rupert on the 31st of August, 1946, on its regular run, and it was a request for an evening mercy flight to Stewart. This is a nice model somebody put. Fog had moved into the Prince Rupert area by the time the aircraft returned, and the crew attempted to find a clear place to land. On board were a crew of 4, a sick child, and his mother and another man. A full-scale search began the next morning, but no trace was found. Several days later, the body of the child and Captain Ken Wilson were found in the water. Many years later, a salvage vessel searching for a sunken fish boat snagged the wreckage off the mouth of Port Simpson Harbor, 18 miles north of Prince Rupert. Well, that's, sorry, I had the wrong thing. That's the lake at Little Lake. And that is, one of those kids in short pants is Ken Simonson, who worked at BC Tel. He's one of the kids in the picture. They used to use it for charters into Garibaldi Lake, Little Lake. Spilsbury had a cabin up at Garibaldi Lake. I think they took all the lumber and went in by Stranraer, for example. It was all black with yellow markings. And I looked at the rest of that story about the fish, about them finding it. I got it, they pulled it out. Man, this is not a fish boat. So it's still there. They dropped it back in the water. But it must have been It must have been the Stranraer. BXO, the Alaska Queen, was bought from the initial owner, Labrador Mining and Smelting, Labrador Mining and Exploration, in the spring of 1947. The original purchaser was Esmond Landau, who was the lawyer for Queen Charlotte Airlines and a major shareholder. He was the money man, Queen Charlotte. It was registered to the airline a month later. In 1960, it was upgraded with the installation of Wright GR 1820 engines using the special custom engine mounts salvaged from the wreckage of BYJ. They built these really special stainless steel mounts for the Wright Cyclone engine, and that was one of the reasons, besides the bodies, that they wanted to get that wreckage up. They took the engine mounts, they used it. This is BXO rather sitting at the hangar at Sea Island. That looks good. It looks good on there. I'm surprised that some of these have faded out a bit on the light. On the 30th of April 1949, BXO struck a deadhead while taking off at the Vancouver airport, causing $15,000 damage. There was another mishap on the 5th of March 51, where a lowering ceiling and visibility forced a precautionary landing in rough open water with 18 on board. One wingtip float was torn off, and 4 men, including one passenger and the co-pilot, spent an hour and a half out on the port wingtip in freezing spray to keep the starboard wing out of the water until the captain was able to taxi to shore. Now that's something happened last week. I had an email from a lady who's, this co-pilot was her cousin. He was killed in the QCA's cancel crash at Mount Benson. FOQ crash on a night flight, an unauthorized night flight crashed into Mount Benson. And this guy, Jaginder Joel, was the co-pilot. He was the co-pilot on this water landing. I got a newspaper clipping showing him. He looks like he's frozen to death. He's been out in the water for however long on the wingtip, keeping the airplane from capsizing. But anyway, they are trying to do some kind of a biography on this pilot. In Spilsbury's book, he calls him a baggage handler, which upset the family somewhat, because I explained to them they were probably like these rampies in ice pilots, because they would hire these young pilots with a pilot's license, and they'd have them. If you watched Ice Pilots, they had them humping baggage, loading freight, washing aircraft, everything, as a co-pilot in a small airline. But anyway, he did have a picture with a pilot's hat on, so he wasn't just a baggage handler. Anyway, on the 23rd of February, 52, the Alaska Queen's regular schedules were ended by a further accident at Sullivan Bay. For another hour or so, it was used for another year or so, it was used for occasional freighting charters, then it was put into storage at Vancouver. On paper, became part of PWA when QCA was sold. So these two Stranraers sat around the back of the QCA and then PWA hangar for a number of years. BXO was not too complete, and BYM was the other one, and it was more complete. Okay, Pacific Western Airlines. Russ Baker, the head of PWA, forced QCA out of business and purchased the airline in 1955. As part of the large mixed fleet of aircraft, what Jim called his queer collection of aircraft, there were two surviving QCA Stranraers, BXO and BYM. But neither aircraft was in very good condition. BXO sat behind the hangar for several years, still in the old QCA markings. BYM was used for charter work and was lost in a tragic accident on the 1st of October 1957. The aircraft had flown into Southern Lake to salvage the floats from a crashed PWA Beaver. Someone here explained it to me earlier. So what I said here isn't quite right. They had one set of floats inside, or one float inside and one float lashed on the fuselage up top. And apparently they were used to carrying lumber and all sorts of things up on top. But when they took off, it wasn't successful. It hit the shore at the end of the lake, bounced into the air, but by that time it was into the trees. It crashed and burned with the rear fuselage falling out of the fire and surviving. Now, I thought here, I've been corrected already this evening. I said it was thought that some unknown person had removed the logging chains from the rear fuselage unknown to the pilot, not realizing that they were there for a purpose, to adjust the center of gravity and improve the takeoff performance while loaded. I was told this by a PWA pilot who thought that was the cause, but it was probably the cause of the one, it may have been the cause of the one at Bly's Inlet too. And all these logging chains in the back, you know, they're heavy logging chains are, and it got the center of gravity right. And they figured some guy came along and, what the heck are these things doing in here? Pissed him off. Anyway, for whatever reason, I made the correct, as I say, it went off the end of the lake and didn't get airborne. In 1980, I arranged to have the rear fuselage and engines, well, there's BYM, and that's when it was working. BYM again. In-flight picture of BYM. They're quite a pleasing paint job with these up. There's BYM. In 1980, I arranged to have the rear fuselage and engines salvaged from the crash site when a heavy lift helicopter was working nearby to erect a microwave tower. The items were lifted out and left at the roadside for a Canadian Museum of Flight volunteer to pick up. They were stored on the farm being rented in the area, but had disappeared at the time a crew belatedly went up to pick them up. Apparently the person moved away, leaving the Stranraer remains behind, and the new occupant disposed of them to a junk dealer who was in the area. So we had to say that the whole back, that and both engines, we had lifted out, put on the road, and that is Andy Craig. No, that's not Andy. That's Jim Lightbone, who was a pilot for PWA and QC, PWA. He later flew the 707s for them. Jim Lightbone, and the next picture is Andy Craig on the left and Jim Lightbone on the right. I think Jim had been a wartime pilot as well. Okay, now we get to the last Stranraer, BXO. In 1980, only CFBXO was left, plus some scraps of several old crash sites. I had just bought a camera in 1960, and while checking out some of the aircraft at the south side, civil side, Vancouver Airport, I came across several huge uncovered wing frames sitting on sawhorses, and nearby was the fuselage of the Alaska Queen, sitting on beaching gear. It was sitting there by the south, well, it was now the south terminal. Yeah, there's the old, well, there's some of the old south terminal, I guess. The DC-8 in the background. The RCF 920 was sold by Crown Assets in May 1944 to the Labrador Mining and Exploration Company, who needed a large seaplane for exploration work in Labrador. Flew for Queen Charlotte, later owned but not flown by PWA. 1959, BXO was purchased by Stranraer Aerial Enterprises Limited, with the intent of restoring it as a water bomber or a freighter. The purchasers were a group of about a dozen investors. PWA Captain Jim Lightbone, a former Lancaster pilot, and included CBC TV host and weatherman Bob Fortune, BC Tel foreman Tony Sachenko, and several local airport characters. After some initial restoration was done at Vancouver Airport, early one morning in late 1961, the fuselage was towed on its beaching gear on the highway out to the Abbotsford Airport. Over the next few months, it was reassembled and mounted on a four-wheel dolly. They got it tied down to a couple of fuel trucks, fuel Mausers, while they fixed it out up at the Abbotsford. They made a dolly out of the beaching gear, a four-wheel dolly, which is two beaching gears. And in 10th of June, 1962, Slim Knights and Jim Lightbone took off from this contraption and back to Vancouver. There it is on the BC. It's a very short coupled dolly. And when it took off, it almost fell off, looks like. As I always say, I think the dolly is still going. But actually, I understand that the guy who used to own Conair had it. He may still have it in his backyard, who knows. Les Kerr ended up with the dolly. Where are we here now? Okay, the proposed 670-gallon underground water tanks were never installed, but BXO soon found charter work in northern Canada. Through the summer of 1962, it was chartered to Wardair to support a survey project ending the season hold and sump on Sears Lake, Northwest Territories. This is BXO at Vancouver, BXO at 1963 and 64, the aircraft was chartered by PWA, but grounded again for 2 years until June of 66. That summer, several aerial sightseeing flights were operated off the lake at Penticton, and the plan being to offer sightseeing flights at Montreal for Expo 67, but this was not approved. That picture's that Yellowknife. Everyone knows Yellowknife is right there by where the seaplane area, by the Wildcat, the famous Wildcat Cafe is just up in the hill above that. So, eaten there once. I had photographed. Okay. The final flight was on the 13th of August 1966 with Jim Lightbone at the helm. The final tally was 3,979 hours time since new, with 471 of those hours since restoration in 1962. I had photographed BXO that day, not knowing it was going to be flown that day for the last time for CBC program. I had not realized until I looked at my slides. Well, these are various pictures of Vancouver. There. There's a rental truck and some suits, guys in suits. I'm pretty sure that's the day they filmed that CBC Klahani show. So I drove on, I drove back to my hangar on the other side of the airfield, and next thing you know, I hear it tootling off into the air. The CMA had expired, the fabric covering the flying surface had deteriorated, the ownership group had run out of money, and in 1967, the ownership was transferred to the Richmond Savings Credit Union. It sat there like that for a number of years, and they advertised it for sale. One of the previous owners, TV weatherman Bob Fortune, purchased BXO from the credit union, had great ideas of getting it flying again, but it was not to be. Although the National Aviation Museum were interested, they had no place indoors at that time to store such a large object. It's a large artifact. So the RF Museum was able to purchase it. Here we are. In August of 1972, RAF Short Belfast freighters, XR-367 and XR-371, which is now itself a museum piece, transported the aircraft to the UK. During the 1970 Abbotsford Air Show, I was examining the Belfast and looked in the door, and there was a Stranraer inside. They had the fuselage in one and all the wings and other parts in the other one. So its last flight, it was well above its regular ceiling. Its last flight was high in the sky inside of Belfast. It's now painted once again as RCF 920. Starting went on display in Hendon in early 1972. One ongoing mystery has been, they've mounted, you may have noticed, they've got the beak, because of the height of their hangar, they've got the beach gear on one side and not on the other, so it sits tilted. One ongoing mystery is the original RCF code, unit code. You know the aircraft is painted QN blank. They don't know what the individual letter was. So that's the end of this, so that's more to come, but that's the end of the formal part. Yeah, okay. So it's sitting there, everyone would love to find a picture sometime of BXO with its QN code on it, but we've never found one yet. I've thrown some in here, I'll just go through them as I'm talking here. These are just some RCF close-ups of the Stranraers. If we still have a few moments, I'd like to say a few words about my late friend, Ken McQuaig. Ken was one of several RCF wartime pilots I knew who had trained on Stranraers at Pat Bay, and then flown Sunderlands operationally with 422 Squadron. Post-war, he flew for Queen Charlotte Airlines from 46 to 54, and in total racked up 1,551 hours of Stranraer time. So he was probably the world's high-time Stranraer pilot. He flew all 5 of the QCA Stranraers. In fact, he missed his chance to go on that Mercy flight when the aircraft was lost. He was there, but he didn't go. He had flown 600 hours in CFBXO at Queen Charlotte Airlines, plus another few hours in the same aircraft at 13 OT Squadron. Ken ferried BXO out from Quebec when it was sold to QCA and was stuck for 2 weeks in North Bay due to an engine failure again. After QCA was sold, Ken flew the Grumman Goose for a further 12 years in airline and corporate service, including a stint in the UK where he delivered a former RCF goose to Lord Grosvenor, the Duke of Westminster, and then flew for the Duke for several months before returning to Vancouver. This goose was converted in the UK to a turbo goose, and I chartered it once after returning to Vancouver, CF AWH. I used to enjoy Ken's company every month at the Quarter Century Aviation Club dinner meetings and had the opportunity to interview him for several hours and copy his 3 logbooks. His daughter Patricia has written a book called Flying Duchesses, mainly about Ken's UK adventure with the goose. What they did, they bought it, him and George Williamson, who was a chief pilot for Hydro, but he used to be a goose pilot too. They bought a goose from McKinnon, and they got it all fixed up and registered, and then Ken ferried it to the UK, because the Duke of Westminster, he had flown in a goose here in BC. He had a lot of interest here. He had like Grosvenor Estates, he had a lot of property, Anderson's Island, all kinds of property. So he sometimes flew in a goose out here, and he wanted to have one, because he had an estate out in Ireland at Loch Earn, where they used to fly the Stranraers during the war. He had to have a goose. So he bought this goose, fixed it up, took it over, and then later on, while it was in England, it was converted to a turbo. And it came back here, and it was flew for Air West for a while, or Air BC, and they converted it back to piston, went to people in Port Hardy, and it was pranged. And I believe the pieces of it are lying behind the hangar. You never throw away any parts of a goose. So some of it's still hanging up around Port Hardy. So that was and Ken was a great guy, and I say his daughter wrote a good book on it, which you see him had it for sale or not, or had it around. The other thing I've got, more of these, fixing breakfast in the galley. Eating breakfast in the there's some bunks hanging up there. Now, just to go through now, there's a number of books. I'll just show you the covers. There's The Accidental Airline by Spilsbury. There's Spilsbury's Coast by Jim Spilsbury. There's Spilsbury's Album, which is mostly photographs, but also includes the aircraft. There's Have a Banana by Bay Bullitt. I say they tended for this VXO when it was back in Labrador. There's Jericho Beach by Chris White, who's written quite a few books, including the Jericho Beach book. There's a book called by James Kitely. He's a friend of mine. He was in England, he lives in Australia now. This is more of a book for modelers. It's one of these little soft cover, detailed stuff for modelers. There's The Flying Duchess by Patricia McQuaid. I said, Patricia, that's not a goose, that's a widgeon on the cover. She said, well, it was such a nice looking picture, I didn't want to change it, but it's not a goose, it's a widgeon. And Ken Molson's book on Canadian aircraft since 1909 has a section on the building of the Stranraers in Canada. There's some CHS journals, there's 3 CHS journals I'm aware of that have this one here. It's got a transcription in it of that CBC program, and a picture on the cover. And there's this one. This one is a Vancouver-produced edition of the CHS Journal. We did a painting by John Moutre, who's one of our members, an aviation artist. And this one, if I even copied that one, I didn't. This one's got a Stranraer article in it. Now there's some other thing. These are a few oddball little pictures I found online, including a chewing gum picture. A trading card, and there's some more little black and white sketches of Stranraers, and there's quite a few paintings around. That's an RAF Stranraer, one of the handful they built. That looks like BXO, the paint job is BXO. And that's it.